as we kind of go into the next slide, as we're talking about diverse curriculum, I want to start by asking the question: at what point did you, in your, as you're growing up, of course, you guys are still pretty young. So, at what point did you start to realize your Blackness, and also, and how has that changed or influenced your interactions with other students and teachers?
I think I noticed, like I said, like once I transitioned from my public school to like my PWI, because like I just wasn't I wasn't in the majority anymore, and like I was obviously the minority because like in my grade right now, like there's only four Black students out of like 63 or 64, and so I think that just kind of made me realize being Black is just a huge part of my identity, and like there are just things that I experienced that like most of my other peers will just never understand, and they just like can't empathize with it as much because like they're just like not in my shoes. And I think in terms of how I interact, it's made it so that I've kind of intentionally sought out like relationships with like people of like similar racial and ethnic backgrounds that I can connect with in a space that is like majority white. Because I feel like although like obviously I have people like friends of like other like races like who are like not Black and like who are white, but I think it's also important to kind of have those friendships where you can kind of just relate to like or like with like your culture, like about like being African or being Black. So I think that's just kind of how I've dealt with like being the minority.
Perfect. And Marlene, feel free to jump in on this question too.
Well, thank you. Um, I really, well, just to let you know that this actually happened, like, in the '90s too. Although I came over from, I came over from Nigeria, to go to college. So my first, I knew that I went to Iowa State, so I knew there was going to be very, very little Black people there. So I didn't really understand it. So I learned from actually an African American there was some kind of incident that happened, and they were like, "Oh, he's not Black, he's African." And that was the first time that I actually had an understanding of my Blackness, because before that how would I say? Yeah, but my othering of Blackness anyway. And then it was from that point of view that I was now my social construct. I started developing a social construct around, my social construct started working around like the American version of of racism and things. Because before that, I was in Nigeria, and my racial construct was just, oh yeah, they know that Black and it's white, but I didn't know all the nuances until that moment, and it was a big teaching moment for me. So yeah.
For me, I think I first realized my Blackness in my first year of my PWI. Now, starting out in the 5th grade, there were less Black people in my class. I was one of 3. And instantly I was met with consistent hair touching. I'd gotten a lot of silly, ignorant comments about, oh, do you use different lotion that isn't white because you're Black? I had been, maybe it was a kind of good part, but I was seen as like cool, or people thought I could instantly like know how to rap and know how to dance really well. And even from parents, parents automatically assumed my socioeconomic status and called my friends and I the ghetto group in school. So it made me very, again, hyper aware of how people would treat me on account of my race. And in terms of now how I've learned to kind of counter a lot of that, I do code switch. In terms of ignorant questions, if I know they're genuine, asking about the culture, I answer them respectfully and educate them. And if I ever feel uncomfortable in a class or with a certain interaction, I make sure that I having healthy conversation and confrontation. And similar to Uche, I always seek out communities, the Black community at my school, the people of color at my school, people who really understand the culture a little bit more around me. And I really do enjoy those spaces.
Nice. Tope?
Yeah, I just want to echo Miracle and Uche's points. I think I first became cognizant of my Blackness when I first arrived at my PWI in the 7th grade. I was one of 4 Black girls in the entire grade, and so automatically I stuck out like a sore thumb, and it was very aware to me just physically that I was different from my peers. But as I began to have more interactions, it became more apparent to me culturally in the ways I was different from my peers that weren't Black. And so it made me more conscious of the ways that I presented myself and interacted with my peers and my teachers, especially as the microaggressions began to roll in more and more as I was in spaces with people who may not have gone to school with Black people before, or as many Black people before. So I was with students who had been going to predominantly white institutions that were white for a long time. And so it was a new experience for me for sure.
So with the next slide on diverse curriculum, if you guys can kind of talk a little bit more about that, like how we were saying, you know, how we have to be intentional sometimes about sourcing some of these materials. So anyone can start.
Yeah, so on the flip side, these are books that we have up here that represent more of the diverse things that we've read in our schools, that are more inclusive of the different ways that Black people are represented beyond the sort of slavery and colonial era and things like that. And so as we have been given more of a say in our courses each year, we've chosen different electives to take in like our junior and senior years. And so these books on the left showcase a few of the books that are taught in these classes. And although these books offer more representation for Black people, it is important to know that these books are not a part of the required curriculum at our schools. And these were books that we read in classes that we had to seek out personally. And so that sort of shows the fact that if you don't seek out these sort of classes where you are given a broader narrative of Black people, that you will not have that experience as a Black student or as a non-Black student. And so some of the questions we have here are, how does a diverse curriculum help to broaden one's perspective?
So for me, like Tope said, like we kind of got more of a say in like the classes that we were taught in like junior and senior year. So I remember like one of my classes for my junior year called Feminism, we read a book called this bridge behind my back or something like that, but it's basically like a book that kind of had like a bunch of different like poems and like prose and like texts from like different feminists and like womanists, and it kind of like highlighted like although there was the women's movement, there's also like the womanist movement for like Black women, because they were kind of excluded from like the women's movement because it was like mostly like white women who are kind of fighting for their own rights, like not just like POC rights. And so I feel like with like that book and like with classes like that I have like this year as well, I've kind of just been able to like relate more to the characters in the books, and I kind of think it makes me more engaged in what I'm reading because I can relate to them in a way. And I know they were kind of talking about how also having a more diverse curriculum can also help people understand like different cultures more, so they kind of just don't have this like very like single view of like being like a Black person or like a Latino person. So I think it's very important to include in the curriculum and for it to be required.
Yeah, very similar to what Uche said. I think that these books are very important because they widen our knowledge. So I myself am ignorant in many ways. So reading the book on the far left, Girl, Woman, Other, actually gave me new perspective on the immigrant experience and the Black experience of those living in Britain, which is something I did not know about. And so I think overall these helped kind of correct a lot of these narratives, these very narrow narratives that we've been preached for a lot of our years. And I think it's just very important for Black characters to just live and act as such, live normal lives, as was said earlier, because it's accurate and, you know, it's easy to relate to these books, and it's easy to garner empathy from others. You know, empathy and emotions are what drive movements and help create change. And so I think giving a lot of people, no matter what their racial background is or ethnic background is, giving people the opportunity to empathize with a lot of these characters and therefore a lot of these communities is very helpful in changing our society.
Yeah, I'd also like to say to Uche's point about the importance of these books being required. I would also just double down on that. I think, especially after the racial injustices of the summer of 2020, predominantly white institutions have been making more of an effort to diversify their curriculum, but it's something that's been long overdue, and I think it's important to continue to try and implement these diverse narratives of Black people and make these things required in schools, so that we can just create a society that's just more empathetic and understanding of the Black experience, and that the fact that the Black experience is not this singular monolith.